So in particular, Bob, you mentioned, you really just talked about the numbers to start. As we say that we're in the third and fourth inning now of a correction. What are we're seeing?
Well, the interesting thing, and one of the big reasons why values are still increasing, is that there's tremendous capital that is flowing into the market. The amount of foreign capital that's coming in, and albeit China has changed, but other countries are filling in. We've seen a tremendous wave of capital coming in from Spain and Portugal. We've seen foreign investors who are absolutely fixated on getting money deployed into the U.S. economy and into New York particularly. So foreign capital is coming in. Domestic capital is having a very tough time competing with that foreign capital. So we have a number of clients who have, for years and years, for decades, have only bought New York City properties that are now buying properties in Philadelphia, in Boston, in Washington, D.C., Florida, Texas. It's really been remarkable, but the good thing for New York is that net, there's much more capital that wants to buy property than available properties for sale, and that's been one of the big things that has kept value buoyed, is that all of this demand has greatly exceeded the supply, and as long as that keeps happening, that's a very, very positive thing for the market.
Now more than ever, it would seem that the courts themselves are very pro-tenant and anti-landlord. Harassment is a big issue. We've seen owners actually go to jail or about to go to jail. Tell us your thoughts on that, what you've been seeing, and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, in the multifamily sector, for years and years and years, the market has been getting more anti-owner and more pro-tenant, and under this administration, that dynamic has been magnified. And I think that, the system itself is flawed. Every politician that you speak to will say that rent regulation is an affordable housing program. Well, there's absolutely nothing affordable about it. It's not an affordable housing program, it's an inertia program. If you happen to have been in that apartment long enough, you get a public subsidy, whether you need it or not. Nobody tests whether somebody can afford the unit or what their income is. And now the proposals, the bills, the laws that have been passed are so anti-landlord that a landlord basically can't even speak to a tenant about anything without jeopardizing a potential harassment suit. And one of the recent bills that has been proposed reverses our constitutional rights and will make the assumption the landlord is guilty until the landlord proves that they're innocent with regard to how they're dealing with the tenant. So because of this, we've had a number of clients who are selling their New York multifamily and buying outside New York. They don't want to buy in New York anymore. This is a big issue.
Let's maybe pivot and talk about just what our business is itself. I mean, brokerage. You and I talk about how technology has maybe changed our industry specifically and what we think may happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. You guys may not know, but Bob plans to be a broker till he has oxygen in his nose, if possible. So we constantly think about what we think the world will look like, even 20, 25 years from now, hopefully 40 years from now, who knows. But what has it done since you started in the business, that fateful day in the mid-'80s, and what's that impact have? And I can see how it shifted even over my time in the last 15 years, but why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very, very fascinating topic. I mean, for those of you who have been around for a while, I started in the business in '84, and we had no computers on our desks, no cell phones, no email, no fax machines. It was wild. We used to carry around rolls of quarters in our pocket. And if we were showing a building and the person we were showing it to didn't show up, you went down to the corner, put a quarter in the telephone and tried to figure out where they were. It's changed so dramatically, and technology has enabled people to be much, much more productive than there ever could be. There have been years in which we've sold 100 buildings. Right? This is within the past 10 years. 20 years ago, we could never have done that. It just was physically impossible. I remember the first fax machine, I think it came around in the late 80s, and FedEx had the first fax service. You'd bring a document to a FedEx office. They had this service called Zap Mail, and they would effectively fax a document to another FedEx office and then hand deliver that document to where it was going, and that was $8 a page to do that back in those days. But the world has changed very, very dramatically, and I think what has happened is that technology has empowered us to do so much more, and it's whittled the field down. I think there are fewer people doing much more today. There's not more business being done, and people often ask me that. They say, Bob, now you can email, you can fax, you can do all these things, you have cell phones, you must be doing so much more business. Individually, we're doing more business, but market-wide, there's not more business being done. There were more buildings sold in the 1980s than there were in the 1990s. More in the 1990s than in the early 2000s. And based upon the way we're trending in this decade, there'll be less buildings sold this decade than last. So what technology has done is it has allowed for the folks who are very, very productive to be even more productive. It's whittled the field down. And I think that as great as that technology has been for us, I think that same technology is going to marginalize us. And within the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, I think that everyone will go, who wants to sell a building, will go to xyz.com, because they'll know that every buyer is on xyz.com, and clients will come to us and say, hey, I want to sell this $200 million building. These are my top 3 bidders. Negotiate with them, finish it up, and we'll pay you 25 grand, and that'll be the business. The business will turn into a consulting business as opposed to a brokerage business. So I'm relatively bearish on the future of the brokerage business because of technology. And I think that just comes with the territory. But I think if 50 years from now some college kid does a thesis on the commercial brokerage industry, I think they'll look back on it and say, wow, and from the mid 2000s, from 2004, 2005 through 2020, that was the golden age of brokerage. That was the best time to be a broker. But I think technology ultimately, as it's changing so many different industries, will absolutely change ours. I've always said that commercial real estate is an analog business in a digital world, and that's going to change. Technology is changing everything, and commercial real estate can't be immune from it. So I'm glad that I'm on the downside of my career as opposed to the upside of my career, because I think it's going to change.
Anything related to volume, value, the demand there that you want to touch on that you didn't earlier?
Yeah, well, I think, again, land is indicative of where folks see the future. And I think that really leads into the conversation about where the heck are we going? What's going to happen in the future? And, nobody knows. One thing I can say is that if you look at market conditions, it is quintessentially what you would see when the market is going to turn. So the question is, where are we headed from here? And the one thing I can point to is I say, look, we're in this malaise. We're in this downdrift in the market, but there has been nothing to catalyze this. There hasn't been the stock market crash in 1987. There hasn't been the credit crisis in 2000. There wasn't the housing market bursting in 2008. There's been nothing to make this happen other than the natural cyclicality of the market. And nobody has ever said that the market wasn't cyclical. The market is absolutely cyclical. So if I had to guess, based on the fact that there hasn't been anything to make it happen, that this correction is going to be relatively mild. And one thing I've learned over the years is that history repeats itself, but it's always a little different. So in the recession in 2000, we had 4 years in a row where volume was down, but we didn't have any one year where value dropped. And so this time around, we've seen values drop in land. We've seen values drop in hotels, which again, those are the two sectors that will always drop first. But we haven't seen values drop in the other sectors. So maybe this is a correction where some sectors correct, some sectors don't, but that's yet to be seen.